Having me.
So, John, as an economist, there are all kinds of things that economists study. What got you interested in foreign aid specifically?
I actually became interested in foreign aid as a student in China years ago. I was an undergraduate living in Beijing, and I double majored in economics and Chinese, and I became fascinated. I was in China in 1999, which was the 10-year anniversary of the Tiananmen event, and looking at how China was emerging from this era of extreme poverty into one of tremendous economic growth. And my first job out of college was at a think tank in Washington, D.C., where I did nothing but study foreign aid for a full year before I went off to PhD.
That's a great story. So, John, earlier Ken and I were debating whether and why there might be an obligation to give foreign aid of some kind to developing countries and to places with lots of poor people. So what's your view? Do you think we have a duty to give aid?
I think that we should approach the issue of aid like a doctor. And doctor's motto is do no harm. And similarly with aid, our guiding principle should be do no harm. And while we can all talk about our moral obligation to help, those in need, the tragedy of aid is that there are all kinds of unintended consequences that come along with writing checks and giving loans that have really left the developing world worse. Off than before the aid boom began in the 60s and 70s.
So the leftists in me, okay, I am many things. Some days a leftist, some days a centrist, some days I think, oh, the heck with it all. But part of me says to that sounds a little bit like something I said in the beginning. You know, people used to say welfare payments make the poor worse off, right? Because it robs them of dignity and self-respect and all that sort of stuff. That sounds kind of, I mean, I hear a little bit of that somehow by giving them assistance that they're due, we do something bad to them. How could that be?
Well, William Easterly at NYU has done a great amount of research on this, and one of the things he shows that from 19 1970 to 2000, $1 trillion were transferred from the developed world to the developing world. But after that process occurred, GDP per capita was lower in 2000 than it was in 1970. Not only that, the largest recipients of aid are often the most corrupt countries. The great tragedy of aid is that funds are fungible. What that means is every dollar that you loan or you grant to a recipient country is a dollar that a recipient government does not have to, is not a accountable for to its own, and that goes in and is then used in monument building and kickbacks. And when I heard you both talking about dictators and corruption in the developing world. All of those dictators were lavish recipients of these aid funds.
So you've given us a kind of aggregate. In the aggregate, right, we don't see aid working. But obviously it works in some places. I mean, there has been development, there have been
technology, who comes into the emergency room